Hello, welcome to the Emerging Future Institute. My name is Benjamin J. Butler, and today I am joined by well-known futurist Sohail Inayatullah, who has a very long background, which I'll attach his bio to the call summary. Sohail is a futurist for the UNESCO. Travels extensively across Asia and the world in the capacity of a futurist, and is also well known in future studies. I think you often supervise PhD students,
yes,
if I'm not wrong. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Benjamin.
It's great to have you, and also I've wanted to talk to you for some time, but the timing is suitable because you've just released a new book, Asia 2038, 10 disruptions that can change everything. And so we want to talk a little bit about the nature of futurism, and then discuss the book. So
Fantastic.
So I guess my first question is what is a futurist, and what sort of sparked your interest in pursuing that as a lifelong journey?
I was 17 and I moved to Hawaii, and there was a course on future studies. And it fascinated me because it was broad. It brought in multiple disciplines from science, social sciences, philosophy, religion. So I liked that part. It also tried to go away from realpolitik. It said, yes, the game that nation states play around power is important, but also there's some different ways to think about reality. So that brought into me, okay, we don't always need to be thinking about politics and international relations. Let's see if we can imagine a different world. So what excited me was the imagination of a different type of world than we currently actually live in. That's one part. The second part, when I was a student there, the main thing our professor said, well, there's an imagination part, but the other part is your toolbox. So it's really strong methodology. Here are methods which we can enhance foresight or forecasting or alternative futures. And that became, whether it's quantitative methods or qualitative or actually critical methods that challenge how we see the future. So that was part two, and part three has been epistemological, meaning in what ways am I the problem or in what ways am I the solution? So it's not like science where I try to disengage or be disinterested. This is very much, we become epistemologically clean. We say, here's my values, here's my perspectives. We're conscious that we're change agents in this process. It's a science, but it's a critical science based on complex adaptive systems. We're part of the solution or part of the problem. And any attempt when we forecast, our forecast enters a problematic political social space, which in fact ends up possibly changing the future. So, it seemed really fun and really cool, and I've been involved in this process for 30, 40 years and just love it.
Oh, well, so you've actually had no other career. You've done this for your entire life. Yeah.
This was it. I did my BA made my degree called Spirituality and Social Change. It was a BA in Liberal Studies in Hawaii. Then master's was in Future Studies, and at the end of the master's, we had a one-year internship. And I interned with the Hawaii justice system and became their futurist, helped them look at futures of mediation, futures of lawyers, futures of AI robots and judges. And then after 8 years of that, then I went back and did my PhD. And my PhD was on epistemology and philosophy and time. And I looked at Indian, Islamic, Chinese, green, feminist perspectives. So it was on macro history. So I really tried to pull back, going back a few thousand years, because you really can't talk about the future sensibly unless you have a real sense of the deep patterns. Otherwise, it just becomes, isn't that a novel, interesting thing, a new robot? Well, so what? Does that really create change? Or is that just one more litany, things that look like they change, but they don't really change? So is it within paradigm change or outside paradigm change? The PhD gave me a chance to really go deeply into epistemology, and it was on a philosopher called P.R. Sarkar, an Indian philosopher. So that was a blast, and I finished that and was gainfully unemployed, and then had a blast being unemployed. I met someone in Finland, and he said, do you want to go to Australia? And I said, are the beaches nice? He goes, yes. So I moved there as a postdoc, and then been working as Australia as the base for the last 25 years.
Wonderful. It's interesting that you know, it was, what was it, H.G. Wells back in 1900, I can't remember, 1901, had this vision that there would one day be professors, just like professors that taught history, professors that taught the future, and now all around the world you do actually have future studies.
I'm fortunate at Tom Kang University, where I have a professorship. We have 10 full-time professors. Over 80,000 undergraduate students have taken a course in future studies. I would say over 100 MA students. And then I teach twice a year at Melbourne Business School, University of Melbourne. And we've had over 200 to 300 CEOs and senior strategists take our course twice a year. It's pretty serious. Every year we have 2 courses a year. And the University of Sunshine Coast, where I'm adjunct professor, we supervise MA and PhD students in futures. They come with us with their own questions. One was futures of terrorism. The other was futures of the brain. There is futures of artificial intelligence. And our role is to guide them and actually, give them methodology. But the part that's different in terms of what we do is something called narrative foresight. So when I have PhD students, they say, well, I want to look at artificial intelligence, robotics, and what that means for organizational adaptability. So that's kind of one level of conversation with someone aspiring to do their doctorate. The part I'm more interested in, I ask them, okay, that's your content area. Tell me your narrative. And that is, they say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, my goal is to help you on this process. What's your life story here? So I had one brilliant consultant who was making a lot of money in the consultant space. But he said, well, I don't know how I'll be in the PhD space. So I asked him, well, let's find a narrative and I can see how I can fit in to best serve you. What's the best metaphor for your journey? He said, okay, in the business world, I know how to do what I do. I do forecasting reports. Everyone loves me. In the academic world, he said, I'm on a camel. I don't know where the oasis is. So I said, okay, so my role in your life for the next 3 years, I'm your camel guide person. I take you to the water. So all I had to do was, he's very smart. All I had to do was, when you would go too divergent from the topic, I would say, look, you think you're going towards an oasis. It's a mirage. Come back. Focus on your chapter. So that clarity of understanding his story around the PhD ensured our mutual strategy was co-created and it led to a great outcome. There's a brilliant piece he did on implications of Jeremy Rifkin in terms of post-industrial, end of capitalism, peer-to-peer, integrative energy society. Quite powerful. And so that was one part, enjoying his innovation and conclusion. But for me, the fun part was, in terms of the actual management of the thesis, what's my role in that process? So most of clients, people I work with, I always ask them that. You want to do a foresight project? Is it you want quantitative forecasts of number of cars in Asian cities? Do you want to know how to become a more green Asia? Or is the issue gender inclusion? So those are some of the issues you might want to pursue. But even if you come up with those forecasts, do you have the organizational capability to make a difference? So people want to do futures because there's uncertainty. Part one is reducing the uncertainty, mitigating risk. Part two is really asking, do we have the skill sets, the capability to actually make the shift? So those become two kind of wings in terms of foresight being not just gee whiz or one more forecasting group, and actually making a difference. Right. You never know. Sometimes in one country, it's a 1 year foresight project. And my personal role was just a few workshops. And I felt we couldn't really make a difference because in that country, the hierarchy was most important. The prime minister had to be involved, otherwise it didn't matter. And finally, that didn't work. And then the head of the institute, she said, well, we can't influence that person. Can we do a foresight workshop with our 12-year-olds? So we got 10, 12-year-olds together and we ran them through a futures process. And that to me was really fulfilling. I mean, they got to ask themselves, what's their vision? What's their direction? And the next question is their behavior today aligned with where they wish to go? If not, what do they need to change? And after 1 hour, I had basically 10, I think there were 10 of them, mostly in tears. And the mothers were knocking on the door saying, what's going on? This is supposed to be that's not what we thought would happen. I said, I didn't know that would happen. But they quickly came to the conclusion. So one of them wanted to be a CEO of a major food chain company in Southeast Asia. But her narrative, as I remember it, was, the sun is never allowed in. The shades are always on, meaning she's in a dark place, unable to communicate her vision. So I said, well, you want to be this way in 10 years when you're in your late 20s or 30s, but your current narrative ensures information about the future, about human connectivity, human intelligence, emotional intelligence. That doesn't happen. So then she came up with a fantastic new life metaphor. And then when she did that, her friend said, this is really beautiful. We can now support you in this journey. You're not doing it alone as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. We're going to support you in creating this life future. So this became very powerful. And from a Asia 2038 book view, it was like, let's align where Asia wishes to go. In this case, let's create a gendered supportive circle. It was all females that support each other as P2P. And when there's hurdles in our organizational business life in our 20s, 30s, let's make sure we stay together as a P2P community. So we create this social entrepreneurship, individual entrepreneurship. And so when I'm going around Asia, I look at some of those signals. What's really changing? And that kind of, the book we're talking about, part of it, one government in the world, I can't say allow who, their prime minister's office said, give us a book about the futures of Asia that's not quantitative. Let's explore the social futures. So that became very exciting. And then that led to this book, and a lot of it is anecdotal from workshops. There's some, quantitative base as well.
Yeah. No, it's a very, very interesting book. I when we agreed to do the interview, I went through it in an afternoon. It's very very readable.
It was my first attempt to make a readable book. It's mostly because the co-author. All my books are really, they're intense academic theoretical books.
Yeah.
And then my friend said, well, that's all good. My one book, Understanding Sarkar, the joke is, can you please write a book called Understanding Sarkar? None of us can understand a word of your book. And then my co-author, she said, well, this is good, but you really need to, leave the castle a bit and enter public spaces. So the imagination was, what would a book at an airport look like that someone actually picked up? So I did my best. Thank you for that comment. I'm not sure I succeeded, but I tried to make it easy to read while still retaining some authenticity around notions of disruption.
Yeah. No, it's I think. Well, my first question is, I'd like you to kind of summarize the approach of the book. But what I like is that it's open. It's kind of up to the people of Asia to determine, future trajectory they go along. But it goes into what's the definition of a futurist, because you say towards the end of the book, well, in fact, you just said it now. Part of it is about finding new metaphors, and I think you mentioned imagination as well towards the end of the book. And it's very easy to go into this sort of Hobbesian world of geopolitics and all this and that. And really, I believe a part of our role is to inspire.
Yeah. The Hobbesian world is true. We don't deny that. We understand real politics. We understand the battle in South China Sea. So there's no denying that reality. But our goal is what you were saying: how do we enhance agency, not how do we enhance it's impossible. We know there's places. I have a new article called "Doing Foresight in Challenging Environments," where the core narrative is nothing is possible here. How do you then make a difference? So the book is really about let's enhance agency, our capacity. What Asia do we wish to imagine? Let's understand the Hobbesian world, and let's create a third space where we have some decent data going forward. So the approach we used is called emerging issues analysis. So most of us spend our time on problems. The big four, et cetera, consulting firms, they do trend analysis. And emerging issues where there's some data, generally unknown, but if this wave continues, it could become a big trend. It could become a major transformation. And the second part, we said, well, once we collect this emerging issue, how do we make sense of it? The sense making was through this methodology, CLA, causal analysis. Here's what changes the litany level, how we measure reality. So we're moving towards a post-economic Asia, post-capitalist Asia. Will we still measure GDP, or are we measuring happiness index? Are we measuring environment, triple bottom line? If that's the case, how do we need to change the system? What incentives do we do for nature? How do we make sure we don't externalize nature, but we actually see the real implications of plastic bottles, plastic bags. Then it was the cultural shift from industrial to kind of a P2P civilization, and the core narrative from an Asia that says no, or an Asia that's lost in conspiracy, or to an Asia that says yes, borrowing from Susanti Gunatulake's work, an Asia that says yes to itself. So very different type of story. The workshop I did in KL this week was OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, and one of the groups was saying, what would a post-capitalist Asia look like? And people said, well, why do you think about that? I said, well, it's going to happen one day. Systems don't live forever. Capitalism was invented. Let's start to think about it. And I love their metaphor. They said, the current metaphor is the invisible hand. The worldview is markets take care of everything. The system is financial investment. Measurement is GDP. Let's change the metaphor to connected hands. And that became, okay, so what does that look like? Worldviews goes towards, 3D printing or micro home manufacturing, towards peer-to-peer. And then and that really, it shifted the whole conversation. Here's what it would look like. So part one was emerging issues. Here's what disruptive novel. How do we make sense of the emerging issues? And then the third part, exactly what you just said, was the role of any text of ours, exactly what you said, is we're here not just to say, here's what will happen. How do we create a space for, here's the world we want to happen? Because I know there's demographics, but even demographics are not destiny.
Yeah. Well, I think you in your various chapters. I've got the book here. I'd like to dip into a few of the chapters.
Please do. Thank you.
So, chapter 1: a bird cannot fly on one wing alone. The rise of Asian women. If you're a businessman from New York and you fly into East Asia, you might be forgiven for thinking that, and say your business area is Japan, South Korea, and a bit and China. Let's say, and say, let's throw in Hong Kong, Singapore. You might be forgiven for thinking that women really don't have a work with. Of course, you'll encounter prominent women in Hong Kong, Singapore, but these big nations in Northeast Asia, not so much. But your book does throw out some really interesting facts, like Taiwan being the second highest in the world on gender equality. I thought it was amazing. So what's your take? Is there hope for Asian women? And in fact, that's the wrong question, because I believe women are not necessity, but we need that sort of yin yang balance in the workplace. So it's hope for us men as well.
Yeah. So the question is there hope for traditional men? And the answer is no. So the Trump phenomena is traditional males who are frightened by the changing world political economy are clinging to the wall, the nation state. And the Trump phenomena in the Asian nations, that comes out in terms of Talibanization. Let's return to the village with walls where traditional men still have power. So anyway, that's definitely a scenario. The one we're looking at, we're seeing indications of the rise of females, and the indicators are really there, the one you mentioned. We're seeing, now the economic argument is what to me wins it. Irrespective of everything, we know firms, businesses, organizations do better with gender equity. I mean, research paper after research paper suggests people act differently when there's gender equity. They act in more robust ways. They had a study on global financial crisis. Firms that were managed by females did much better post-GFC. So their understanding of risk was far more, is the word robust, far more astute. So even from a traditional productivity measure, gender equity enhances. So the second, but then you go to narratives, the traditional Asian narrative: first serve your Confucius, then serve your husband, then serve your son. So I think everyone understands that. And the female leaders who rise tend to have fathers who are prime ministers. So we see that in South Asia, which has had female prime ministers. but it's still based on the family model. As we go outside the family model towards a more open economy, then the family model of incentivization reduces, and an open market in a way the best will do the best. So those traditional blocks to females are taken away, and so females can quickly go. It's an emerging issue. We argue it will become a trend, and we argue it enhances productivity. And clearly, if you, like you said, a businessman flies in, they're going to see traditional Asia. But even within traditional Asia, one would be remiss to assume that power is not active. So we did one workshop in an Asian city with it was with mayors, and we were doing this interactive game to look at alternative futures. The issue was congestion. Solution was work from home. And then we did a role playing where we had someone play the housewife, et cetera, et cetera. And the housewife stood up and said, well, I don't want him working from home. And we said, why? So I said, well, then he'll have an affair with the maid. And then one of the other mayors said, well, she was female mayor, I'll have an affair with my male maid. And there started this incredible tense war in the room. And quickly the result was an appreciation. Solving congestion is a gendered issue. So the females were saying, you guys took public space and you gave it private space. Now you want to enter our private space, the home. If you're entering the home, then we want a reconfiguration of power politics. So now we have a real shared home and shared public space. So this is where the pressure of climate change leads to gender equity. That's the kind of world we live in, which was really, I was like, is this really happening? And so the first, second order implications immediately showed us gender was the issue, not congestion. So females were designing cities. By females, of course, you can be a female and have inner patriarchy, right? You see the world through the patriarchy lens, that your your sex doesn't matter. So we're talking about different core principles, but you said yin yang. If we took those principles, do you fund more highways or do you fund communities? So we just did a project with one of the largest banks in Asia, and that became the real issue. Congestion is caused by our measurement of how we measure success, which is the number of kilometers paved. And the worldview is car-centric, meaning I love my car. And the reason why Asian cities are doing that is follow the Western magic, right? The West knows best. And so the car is not a symbol of transportation, it's a symbol of we've arrived. So that's true in 2018. If we go to 2038, what would it look like? And the bank helped us with this. And they said, we changed the metaphor from I love my car to I love my community. We go from car-centric to mobility-centric, automated cars, new bicycle systems, pedestrian walkways, meaning the KL group said everything should be 20 minutes away from us. So, and then the system is we're going to incentivize low carbon emissions transport systems. We're going to incentivize walkability. The measurement became we're going to measure projects that increase connectivity. So this is where suddenly you go from transport, gendered, community-based, you get a very different future. So that's why on that measure, we seem very hopeful.
Yeah, yeah.
And that doesn't mean there's not swings back and forth like we're seeing with Taliban and with Trump. There's definitely the voice of suddenly those people who see, a new future is emerging, and they get really scared.
My wife, as you know, my wife is Korean, and Seoul is sort of archetypical of what you just described. That this mentality of we've arrived, and
yes,
the car population in Seoul is crippling. It just takes forever to get from one side of the city to the other, and we've gone through that cycle of proliferation of cars, and then the last 10 years as credits become available. Everyone's buying German cars as a sign, as a status symbol.
In this one country we were working with in Asia, we interviewed some of the people. They would say, well, I have 5 cars, I have 6 cars. And so it was very much car is not about transportation. So then we started to ask, what are some other ways you can signal we've arrived that don't lead to harmful impacts on nature and actually get you to where you want to go?
Right. Yeah, that would be nice. I was going to ask you, you've got an interesting chapter on will you be able to marry your robot?
Yes, that's more controversial.
the new extended Asian family. Do you want to say a few words about that?
I can see some people would find this quite frightening. So we're not suggesting go marry a robot. We are suggesting that artificial intelligence will become commonplace. There's a great new article by one scientist who says, before we didn't want to have cell phones yet. It was like, put away your cell phone, it's bad for you, et cetera, et cetera. Now everyone can't imagine a world without their smartphone in their pocket. Safety, security, accessibility, easeability, everything. So he was saying, well, in 10, 15 years, we're going to have a microchip which will do all the same thing. So we'll feel, well, no, please give me the microchip because I want all those things as well. So the robotics world is, as the Asian families become more inclusive and we have robots in our homes, there'll be a certain group of people who perhaps extend their affection to in today's language, uncomfortable areas. In Europe, there's already 2 brothels that have robot sex bots, and they're doing really well. Now, I'm not so the upside of that is end of sex trafficking. The downside, it's still, from a feminist view, it's still, in a way, exploitation of females. But if we go back to the Asia issue, we already have a few indicators. A few people have actually married their robot. This one person in China, his mother kept on saying, get married. To get her, to irritate her, he married his robot. So I think the real argument is as we move towards an industrial to an AI-driven society, technology will become so commonplace, the traditional divisions will start to disappear. Certainly some countries will say it's illegal to marry a robot. I can already see that. Other countries will say, well, as long as you treat the robot well. The Ministry of Health could say, well, does that reduce STIs, sexually transmitted diseases, STIs? If it does, STDs, we agree. So this is the kind of a new space being created, and we can see that emerging. How far it will go, that's speculative. But I think the deeper issue for us is a rights world where we treat others well, and robot becomes an example of that. Then if robots are in a good space, let's say, well, I'm treating kids well, I'm treating the elderly well, I'm treating nature well. So what would, in my own teacher, Sarkar, he would say, that's a new humanist civilization where the other is treated well.
It's interesting. In the West, there's a much greater fear nowadays of robots. Yes. Whereas you take a society that's sort of more animist, the Shinto-based Japanese society, they've been conducting funerals for those Sony, I forgot what robot.
Yamaguchi, something like that. I don't know the word either. Yeah, those. The Asimov.
Yeah.
I was sad too when I heard they were being put away.
Yeah, very.
But your point is brilliant. So the robot view is based on worldview. So from a traditional Western one, it's another. From a Shinto Buddhist, it's part of emergent technology which we embrace. We don't necessarily assign it as something that's evil. How do we live with otherness in a respectable way? And that becomes a far more interesting question. So I kind of agree with you. AI robotics is not distant epistemologically. It's something that we'll embrace in especially East Asia, then Southeast Asia, and later South Asia, and finally 2080, 2090, Southwest Asia. So there will be like a wave of flowing of robotics AI. There'll be resistance, and we say, well, if you resist, you'll get poorer. I mean, that's kind of, in this case, there's an economic argument. But then the other part is, if we have AI, how do we ensure the poor and the weak? And then you have to have universal basic income. We have to have some kind of bottom. The debate we had in Geneva about this at a UNHCR meeting was the current is a safety net with holes in it. The future needs to be a trampoline. So it's a springboard that keeps you safe, but it has entrepreneurship incentivized. So you want to go out and make a difference. So that became to me quite fascinating. I think Asia has a possibility of that.
Well, one aside, I'm not sure you wrote about it in this particular chapter, but as we're talking about robots and AI, given given global trends, do you worry about I guess if there's a global trend of automation and robots, what happens to a big economy like China with export reliance and?
I mean, that's the big disruption. I mean, the part I worry about is killer robots, right? Enhancing our ability to hurt others through robots.
Yeah.
So I think the kind of global protocols, we will not create those, is important. The end of manufacturing as we know it, that's a worry. So that means, one, either I fight it or I embrace it. So a workshop I ran in the medical area, if someone develops 3D printed braces, does the dentist say, no, I'm not going to allow that? Or does the dentist bring in 3D printed technology in her or his dentist office? So that's saying, okay, this is a shift. Let me adapt, let me include, let me create value out of it. Second is let me defend and put away. In terms of AI in East Asia, China, for example, then it's saying, yes, the model that got us here won't get us further. And that's even more so for South Asia, because the kind of manufacturing boom is unlikely to occur at the same level as the kind of the wave goes from China to South Asia, because you don't need cheaper labor, you'll use AI robotics. So if we occur, then it needs definitely a statewide or a global agreement. We're entering this world, it will get rid of jobs we don't like, but then we have to have a net. And we have to create a social net, otherwise we go towards violence. I was at a conference once, and after my speech, they said, I had to go sell my books. And I was like, we didn't want to do that. I want to rest, go have lunch. And the person next to me, his booth, he had a robot. He said, Sohail, go for a walk, have lunch. My robot will sell your books for you. And he just took my voice. In 1 minute, he made the speech. And then I came back, and the robot had sold, I think, 3-4 books. Wow. And I had lunch. And I thought, how good is that? But there was trust that the funds wouldn't disappear, and people walking by thought it was cool.
Well, I'm a big believer in applying wisdom to technology. We can go to extremes with social media and stuff, but I must admit I was impressed this last week by Google's I forgot what they call it, like a Google Assistant. And
yes.
they did a demonstration showing this assistant making a phone call and making a hairdressing appointment, and then an appointment at a restaurant.
Yes.
And, it was done very, very effectively and quite eloquently. I was quite surprised, and it was able to understand nuance. And of course, part of me thought about the jobs that could be lost, and the other part of me thought, well, actually, I often have to waste time making different appointments, and I could be getting on with my core work.
Yes,
I'm a big fan of like Cal Newport's book Deep Work, and I guess it's my inner Zen. Every time you move away from your current task, it takes 15 minutes to get back into what you were doing. So I think these technologies, like your robot, are going to have a big impact.
And your point is great. So our role as futurists is, here's a wave that's coming. Choice 1, defend and fight. Choice 2, find a niche. Choice 3, what's the wise use of new technologies?
Yeah.
And our role is running states, countries, individuals through foresight methods, futures wheel, for example. If you adopt this, here are some possibilities. Now, what's the wise strategy? So that's where futures, we help make a wise difference, to ask people to think through first, second order. And the other, to get them through, well, Horizon 1, I'm too busy for the robot. Horizon 3, what is the imagined impossible? And Horizon 2 is what we do. How do we handle uncertainty around technology in wise ways?
Absolutely.
So that's what I've been seeing more and more in Asia. It used to be the professor gives a talk, students just respect, right? And then phase 2 has been these facilitated, inclusive knowledge labs, foresight workshops, and that's been exciting. So one of the chapters focuses on that. Can we move from the classic Confucian professor knows everything to actually knowledge is everywhere, let's unleash creativity. So that's one of the other waves we're seeing. And my experience in the last 30 years running futures workshops in Asia, the first few years was uncomfortable. And people say, well, no, just tell us already. Just tell us the answer. Give us the 9-hour lecture. And then I do my 1 hour and say, okay, I've done my part. The next 2-3 days would be facilitated. You're the experts. We're here to bring out knowledge in you. And there was like, some people really get upset. They said, no, we came to this workshop for the answer. And now 20 years hence, I've seen, no, most people, whether it's Bangkok, Manila, Taipei, Hong Kong, Singapore, they just get it like, yes, there's a demographic shift. And that's their engagement with interactive platforms like Facebook, et cetera, where they're used to now that they have a voice. That's a big shift I'm seeing.
Do you see that, and you mentioned education, I know you're involved in it, do you see it percolating down the system? Because you go to like countries like Korea is a good example. I've got a 3-year-old, and at the moment I can't see putting her through the Korean the schooling system, because it's still very much about conformity. And in your book you mentioned Asia getting some of the highest scores on traditional metrics, numeracy and whatnot, but where are the glimmers of hope?
The imagination of facilitated learning is there. The system doesn't support it. So I've run workshops in one country with about 150 deans and vice chancellors, and everyone wants a new, wiser, interactive P2P system. They don't want the wisdom to go. In Malaysia, it's called the Merabi, the ethical, wise teacher, but in P2P networks. So they're not saying let's go totally flat democracy. They say we need both. But the systems don't support it. So most ministries in Asia still have clock in, clock out. I have some of my professors' friends, what they do, they have to clock in, clock out, and they have now electronic surveillance. They send their graduate students to clock in for them. So the card shows here in the office. So everyone's trying to game the system. So the work I've done with some ministries, they said, we know we need to shift. We have to get collective agreement. We start there, but we know education is very conservative. Parents say, yeah, but in my era, we had to suffer. How come they don't have to suffer? I had to teach 50 classes. How come they only teach 2 classes and the rest is online and then they meet? So this is really in that wrestling place where the image is there, the system is not supportive, deep culture is nervous. All the stakeholders aren't there. I'm confident, but I'm very clear we're in the midst of this 20, 30-year transformation. And I'm not sure how it's going to work out. I've run it at every level in many countries, and that tension comes up every time. We had one with a minister with 50 vice chancellors. And the minister said, I'll meet the prime minister on Tuesday. You've come up with these novel suggestions. How many of you, when I meet the prime minister, and if he disagrees, how many of you will still support me? 5 raised their hands. So even they agreed with the imagination, the real politics was, no, it's clock in, clock out. It's a discipline, it's a system. That doesn't mean this emergent system won't occur, because young people want it. So that's the wave of the demographics saying, no, we will not tolerate the old system. And old professors saying, wait, I've always done it this way. And ministry saying, well, here's how we judge performance. So maybe there's a third space, traditional performance measures with community facilitated peer-to-peer education. Maybe there's a compromise space that can be created. 3 days you have to go to university, 4 days you can work anywhere. It's not going to go to the full-time 24/7 education everywhere in 5-10 years. We still have a way to go.
Who's ahead of the pack?
Oh, I wish I could say. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, I can see places where there's excitement. I mean, the countries I've run workshops, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, there's excitement about this approach. So, but I don't want to go the next step and say, well, here's the quantitative data ahead of the pack. Sure. And maybe the pack has to figure out collectively. Yeah. So we don't want ahead of the pack anymore. I'm not sure.
Sure, yeah. So you mentioned young people. I liked the chapter on the gross national cool and how more and more people are wondering, which I'm a big fan of. That's how I get a lot of my insights about the world. And you mentioned the paper written by Jim Detour and moving to a dream dream society, a dream society.
Yes.
About that?
Yes. So Young Suk Seo and Jim wrote that article, and Dr. Sung Won, he's been focused on that. And their argument was, again, industrial is manufacturing. And digital or post-industrial or whatever you want to call it, they're looking at design and coolness factors. And I thought that was intriguing, the dream economy. The part that convinced me when I read a BBC piece that said every $100 spent on the coolness industry leads to $400 in increased sales for traditional products. So that was a South Korea study. You spend $100 on coolness, you spend $400 on Samsung. With the coolness brands, the new product. So then artists and designers that I work with, they said, okay, this is interesting. We've been pitching ourselves as we're different. This is saying we're different. And in fact, our coolness can help you in the traditional economy. There's an economic incentive there as well. I mean, for us as futurists, we understand it's niche creating. You're following your passion. You're doing something different. And then from that difference, you can be an entrepreneur, social or economic or cultural or even spiritual. But the economic link is what I found fascinating. But then the next level of analysis says, if GNC is a good measure, then let's rethink our current measurements. The GDP worked, and now it doesn't work. And again, but the system is still based on GDP. Whether it's in Asia or other places, the accountants have the last laugh. So then how do we get accountants to adopt new measurements and they still live in the old measurements? That becomes the Horizons challenge. Right, so that culture becomes one of the factors for economic national development or transformation.
You'll remind, I mean, it's a slightly different topic, but related, but the idea of transitioning to something beyond GDP, there's so many arguments for it. When I was a budding venture capitalist, I remember wanting to have a positive impact on the world. So I went to see a top climate scientist in Asia. And I said, look, this is the fund we're trying to establish. We want to deploy capital into something good, and I'm here to learn. I've got my notebook. Teach me all about climate change, etc., and what's going to have the biggest impact, the biggest bang for the buck. And so I was poised with my pen, ready for him to teach me all these technologies that he was interested in. And his answer was, change the way we measure GDP. As long as 3 cars is better than 2, as long as we're in that world, then it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, that's it. And so the accountants, the financial system, it's a systemic change. I know, I mean, the little ways in our own nuclear family, that's what we asked. So when I was traveling a lot, then our family met and said, well, is this the wise way how we're running this? So then it became, when clients say, please come to this project, we developed a family measurement system. Does it lead to prosperity? Is it too far away from the kids? So when they were young, they would miss me, right? So then that became measurement 2. Measurement 3 became, does it make a difference? So we said, okay, if we want a post-GDP, we get prosperity, but let's also seriously include other measures. So you get some fantastic invitations, but it's too far away. Or the client seems kind of boring. You don't really think it's going to make a difference. It's just so they can tick off the box. We had a futurist speak. And so those things then we don't do. So I think that's for any organization. I mean, the big thing is let's change GDP, right? The small thing is in my organization, in my local family, in my life, what measurements of how I quantify what I do, how do I need to change that?
Excellent point, yeah.
So I saw, for example, one teacher, she was saying, well, people who want to lose weight, they're focused on calories. You're going to be playing the calorie game the rest of your life, or is it you want to be healthy, happy, strong? So why not focus there, then see what are, so that shift I found fantastic. So for me, it goes back to core narrative, metaphor, shifts reality.
And that's very empowering because GDP for the average man or woman on the street is very out there. That's government's problem. It would be nice for us to change GDP, but when it's there are things that we can change today, which is good. I was going to ask you something big in discussions about Asia, the end of the God King. What's I mean, some people will point to the Philippines, Erdogan, Xi Jinping now has amassed a lot of power. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
I mean, clearly anyone who reads that chapter will say the authors for this book are stupid, right? Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I'm okay with that. Emerging issues analysis says, here's the world we're seeing. Yes, it's true. The God King is, in many countries, is running the show. Our hypothesis, there's indicators people don't want to always live with a God King. That doesn't mean we don't want safety, security. That doesn't mean we don't want representative democracy, but everyone wants to ensure an adequate judicial system. Because the God King can step over all our safety mechanisms. That God King seems to say things are safe until they go for you. And suddenly it's not so safe. And there's one country which just had an election, which kind of challenged that. We said, no, a working judicial system ensures one person, one vote. It ensures a different type of world. So I think we've had this, the God King solves everything. And I'm not sure the emerging issues we're suggesting that's going to be challenged more and more. Now, we'll have pendulums back and forth. We're seeing the God King return in the US, for example. But the other story is the emperor has no clothes. And in that person's case, you know, it's also literal. So, that bad joke, we'll skip that. So, I want to maintain our argument. People who want wise leaders who create safety, security, but the God King, the person who knows everything, that story has been done over in Asia. And we've seen what the Marcoses did and like 20 other examples. Right now, we have had a pendulum shift. You know, we need some stability, security. Things have gone too far. So let's watch that. And 10 years from now, let's have this conversation again.
Yeah, no, I wasn't one of your readers that thought you were mad writing that chapter. I'm aware in Asian history of very, very powerful women. You know, I spent 8 years living in Japan. There's a lot of actually powerful women in the mythology of that country.
So one is the maleness of it. You know, part two is the Empress Queen. Part two is young people. Part three is technologies. All suggest one figure alone can't do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't need someone in our heart represents safety, security, but that's a spiritual approach. And Asia has that spiritual tradition. So a spiritual guiding light, which is different from governance with one male has power forever.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say it was just a gender issue. Clearly,
I'm just playing off you. I'm agreeing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think about Korea now and the gap I'm seeing between when I move in different circles, and so if I go and meet high-level C-level executives in Korea, they're all wearing suits. It's predominantly male. The hierarchy and the Confucianism is literally probably the strongest anywhere in the world, and everyone has to sit in the right place, and then you go to a co-working space and you see Korean youth who are flying back and forth to Silicon Valley, and they don't want any part of the hierarchy, and the gap is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for that example. I felt that in Singapore. I see it in Malaysia. I see it in Thailand. This startup culture, and it is around coolness, around innovation, around new technologies, and around gender equity. Those are some of the emerging issues we can see. And the hypothesis they will keep on going up. And I think you're suggesting it is a tension of two worlds, and there'll be an integrative solution. How do we keep some of the traditional and include some of the novel?
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, we wouldn't want to jettison all of the
No,
accumulated wisdom.
yeah, there's lots of value in that. People have learned through centuries of experimentation.
What about I know we're running out of time. I was going to ask you about the Asian Confederation. So, so when one looks at the world, I often look through the prism of centralization versus decentralization. And for me, one of the powerful nascent trends could be a desire for more power at the local level and decentralization. And one of our early calls was with Parag Khanna.
Yes, fantastic.
You might know. Yes. He talks about the weakening of the nation state and cities becoming more powerful. I look at blockchain and perhaps the empowerment of the individual. So for me, I've had a question about the sustainability of the EU, despite it's got very noble goals, but it's obviously having some hiccups at the moment and big challenges. Is that really the future? More of these confederations?
No, your point is fantastic. I'm with you all the way. So imagination one is like the US, right? The United States. Imagination two is this softer European Union, EU, right? And you've hinted at imagination three. What would a confederation of cities, states, individuals, this kind of hodgepodge of collectivities, individualities, how would we design that? I mean, clearly, the argument is pretty clear. Climate change, the whole crime, all those don't respect nation states. For Asia to do better, the global economy, it needs to have its own rules. And US is making that space now, saying, look, they're kind of, if they move away from that, that suddenly creates a space. Well, how do we ensure we're not punished for talking to Iran? The current nation-state system US will punish those countries that talk to Iran. An Asian confederation says, well, maybe if we're trading our own currencies, we're not punished. We equally have power. But now you're saying, well, let's make the confederation far more nuanced. Not just nation-states, but city-states. So this becomes the fantastic design problem. How do we redesign Asia for the future? The easy model is kind of a China runs everything, right? China is empire. And we know all the weaknesses in that. The second model is the EU, and we know the weaknesses in that as well from the last financial crisis. You've hinted at a third model, and that's to me where the discussion should go. What would a third confederation look like, given the nation-state structure of Asia is not working?
Is that challenging? Is that challenging with China's muscle at the moment? Clearly,
yeah. Well, let's go back to geopolitics and real politics. So, what are the conditions which would convince China that empire is not the way to go? That in fact, be creative, design different confederations, different integrated, different trade agreements, different types of treaties. And what you're saying, don't see cities as just parts of the nation state, see them as some levels autonomous. So it's that global local stuff. I mean, that's always the clever design. Making it happen is not so easy. And we know that. So our idea was, well, we can see the current model is not working. We can see in high-level meetings, someone always says, yeah, that's interesting. The only way to solve that is with a confederation. So ministerial meetings say, okay, wouldn't that be interesting? Then we wouldn't have that problem. So the minor issue right now, work I do with law enforcement throughout Asia, a commissioner tells me, you want that world, I just call the commissioner to my country and it's done. It's person to person, Asian style, right? I said, yeah, that's true and that's nice. Your country can call the head of police in your country and solve the criminal who's running between countries, but that's not a sustained systemic solution. And what if, when you retire, what happens? So the sustained systemic solution is not person-person. We like person-person, but we need systemic agreements around crime, around climate change, around trade, and those emerge with a confederation. Now, every country, when I present that to, they always say, yeah, as long as my city is the center, as long as we're Brussels. So when I hear that, okay, there's a way to go here. And they get really upset when the other people say, well, it's no, their city-state is the center, or their country is the center.
Yeah.
So we're in Horizon 1, too difficult. Horizon 2, well, what did it look like? Horizon 3 is very clear. We need as futurists to imagine the new Asia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can't be nation-state based by 2040, 2050. I mean, it could be inching, but it has to be something else. And that's our role. Design, imagine, get memes, get metaphors, get agreements, and push society towards there. Yeah. Otherwise, we're doing what everyone else is doing. Traditional policymakers, advisors to the prime minister. We have to be doing the things they're too busy to do. That's our role. Imagine, design, create, include.
We did actually two calls with Bit Nation.
Oh, fantastic!
They're friends of ours. Of course, that's quite a big step, but nonetheless,
it's a different world.
It's an interesting conversation that they certainly open one's mind to new possibilities.
Yeah, we want to make these. The Confederation means a legitimate conversation. EU has made that possible. Even critical renderings of EU, the benefits are dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, local citizens, even from something just as simple as, when you go between countries, you're no longer charged those internet fees, the roaming fees. What a nice thing to do. Just a seamlessness.
Yeah, they've done some great things, and unfortunately made some big mistakes along the way. And
without a doubt.
Yeah, but we better not touch on Brexit now, because that will that will lead to another 20 minutes of dialogue.
So the conversation becomes, for those of us living or working or spending time or supportive of Asia futures, is, well, how can we learn from those mistakes and design something differently? Yeah. And how do we get ministerial and prime ministerial agreements on that process?
So my last, I guess the last thing I want to say is Asia now saying yes to itself?
Yeah. The emerging issue is starting at every level throughout. I remember during the global financial crisis, a colleague from South Korea, they said, we thought the West knew the future. It suddenly hit us, they don't.
Yeah,
now that the end game is there, so then it becomes, well, if they don't know, who's going to invent the next phase in history? So I'm very excited by the movie Black Panther about Wakanda. It's one of the best movies I've seen. Wakanda becomes the imagined future, not based on traditional Asian or American or European science fiction, but say we'll develop our own science fiction based on the future we want, based on our own view of history, ancestors, community, tribes, spirituality. We create something else. Yeah. So I always ask in every meeting, where's the Wakanda in Asia? And the purpose of Asia 2038 is, in a way, to create the new Wakanda for Asia. Mm. And so that means saying yes to history, present, and also to the new future.
Mm. Many, this is my perspective, many people, and I can fall into this trap of saying West versus East or US versus China. And I guess because I, like yourself, I bridge two cultures. My daughter is Eurasian, basically half Korean, half English. And so I want everyone to thrive. And quite often when I've lived in Asia, I've been in this space where I've discovered some treasure. It could be something like I remember first reading the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu.
Yeah, beautiful.
Being so inspired by it. Actually tears came to my eyes the first time I read it. And I remember running around China being excited by it. And I was on an aeroplane, and this mother and daughter were sitting next to me. And they couldn't believe that this white guy was reading the Tao Te Ching, and they'd never read it. And I often have these conversations where it's like I would like many of my Asian friends to step into their Asianness so that we can co-create it. So genuine co-creation of the West can happen, as opposed to just following the Western model.
It's beautiful. No, two of my teachers, Ashish Nandi, and he talked about a Gaia of civilizations. The classic Orientalist view was here's West, here's East, right?
Yeah.
And then this was, well, actually, each one is in a field connecting, learning, not learning from each other. And that's what you suggested. They're actually in dialogue with each other. And we need to see cultures as far more interconnected, interassociated, and you're even saying co-creating. So it's a Gaia of civilizations instead of the Cartesian bifurcation, the Cartesian divide. So I just love the way you're talking about it. And so we're many. So each one of us has multiple selves. And that's why part of foresight work is actually the inner work. We're saying really we're complicit. So when people do a futures process, we always go back to, do I have the appropriate self to create the future I want? What changes do I need to make? And you're suggesting, very clearly, we need to discover our multiple selves across cultures. And that creates this kind of, garden of civilizations to be utopian. And we also get there's pesticides everywhere, and there's people who like to bomb gardens. So, we're kind of hanging out in both spaces and trying to push the debate and the culture forward. And so your Tao Te Ching comments, I very much share. And I mean, Asia, that's the Asian strength, right? Multiple civilizations accepted.
Yeah, I was just talking to my father yesterday. We have another home in southern Spain.
Beautiful.
Talking about Alhambra and the inclusiveness of the Moorish cultures. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the inner work that's necessary, because you have a beautiful quote at the end of the book, which I'd like to read by your teacher Saka. The flame of a lamp lights up countless lamps. The touch of a great personality wakes up innumerable sleeping hearts. That is why I say the future of the human race is strikingly resplendent.
No comment. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, what beautiful quote. Well, it was a real pleasure to speak with you, Sohail, and hope we can do this again one day.
Thanks, Benjamin.